December 2023. My name is Robin and I am a compulsive gambler. Those were the words that tumbled out of my mouth when I was given the floor at my first and to date only visit to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. Before I go any further, I should say that I've nothing but respect for what organisations like GA do. Gambling can ruin lives, and for many people, finding a group like that is the lifeline they need. I'm genuinely glad those communities exist. But for me, at least back then, it didn't feel like the right fit. Now, more than 20 years on, I'm not quite so sure. Why did I attend the meeting? To cut a long story short, it was down to a girl I was smitten with. At the time, I thought she might be the one I had been looking for ever since I had lost the first love of my life some 15 years earlier. She wasn't, as it turned out, but I had convinced myself that she was. The jury is still out on whether I am a problem gambler or not, but the die was long cast when it came to women. I was, and to some extent still am, a hopeless romantic. I've lost count of the number of women I've fallen head over heels for, usually far too quickly before either of us had got to know each other properly. That tendency to fall hard and fast has never gone away, but I am beginning to think that now, at the age of 60, where affairs of the heart are concerned, the ship has well and truly sailed. I believe it all stems back to Molly, that first love whom I lost. After that, I was desperately trying to replace her, and having never fully got over her, it simply didn't work. Many of my amorous cravings over the years remained unrequited. My love life was one long series of disappointments, punctuated by occasional moments of joy that were just enough to keep me hoping. My brief, tempestuous relationship with Sally, the girl who persuaded me to go to the GA meeting, was one of those rare interludes when the flame burned brightly, alas, briefly. She was seemingly as desirous of me as I was of her, and for a few glorious weeks in the summer of 1999, I was so loved up from the hours I spent in her bed that when she suggested I stop betting, I seriously considered it. Sally didn't like horse racing. She was as anti-racing as it's possible to be anti about anything. I get that. A lot of people don't like it for a variety of reasons, concerns over animal welfare and gambling harm being just two of them. She also wanted us to do things together at the weekend, and took a dim view if I so much as hinted that watching the 3 o'clock at Sandown Park on a sunny afternoon was more important than going for a picnic or driving down to the coast. Looking back, she was probably right, and at the time I was so enraptured with her that for the first time in my life, I earnestly contemplated knocking punting on the head. And that was how I ended up sitting in a circle of strangers, confessing my deepest, darkest secrets, as well as listening to their sorry tales. As for my opening statement, I had some issues with it. To begin with, there's my name. Robin is what it says on my birth certificate, but no one has called me that since I was a teenager other than my mother, and she's long dead now. I don't like it, and haven't ever since I was at school. Back in those formative years, I got teased that it was a girl's name because some of my friends had seen an American TV show which included a female character called Robin. Also, without fail, every person I met growing up made the Robin Hood connection as soon as they heard my name. They all thought they were being hilarious, as if they were the first person to ever think of it, even though I'd heard the same boring thing hundreds of times before. I had a friend at school called Jason, and he used to get the same nonsense about Jason and the Argonauts. We both concluded it was incredibly irksome, but couldn't do anything about it. In my case, this went away in the end, because from my teenage years onwards, I acquired the nickname Nobby, and it's stuck with me ever since. I can't remember the exact moment it started, and it was a mystery at first. Even people referring to me as Nobby Clarke couldn't tell me why, but I eventually figured it out. I remember another friend at school telling me that Nobby is short for Norbert, but I've never met anyone called Norbert, so I dismissed that suggestion. Then, a few years later, it came up in conversation in a pub when I discovered that there is a penchant in this country for people with the surname Clarke to acquire the nickname Nobby. That led to further research and several possible explanations. The most likely relates to a certain type of hat worn by clerks in the city of London hundreds of years ago. Quite why this archaic tradition should have endured into the modern era, I have no idea, but the name stuck at school in Kentish Town, and I've never shaken it off. It's not the most flattering of nicknames, being not a million miles away from Knobhead, which has also been cast in my direction on a few occasions. To be fair, that was probably with justification, as I was doubtless acting like one at the time. Even so, I still prefer it to Robin, and at least it stopped people from banging on about Robin Hood all the time. The only reason I used my real name in the GA meeting was that it's supposed to be anonymous, so I went with my birth name, which no one I had met for at least a decade knew me by, not even Sally. As for the compulsive gambler bit, I did not consider myself to be one then, and I don't consider myself to be one now. My fascination with betting has always been about the mechanics and mathematics of it all, not a desperation to pour every spare penny in my pocket into a fruit machine the second I enter a pub. I learned my lesson about those things the hard way, chucking away my pocket money in them as a teenager, and haven't touched them since. I realized early on that there are two types of gambling. The most common being those where the odds are mathematically and irrevocably stacked against you. Fruit machines, roulette, scratch cards, bingo. They all fall into this category. Of course, anyone can get lucky on a given day, but play any of those games long term and in the end you will certainly lose. Take a roulette wheel, for example. There are 37 numbers on the wheel, including 0. Bet on a winning number and the casino will pay you out at odds of 35 to 1 if you win. The true odds, however, are 36 to 1. That doesn't sound like much of a margin, less than 3%, or twice that if the wheel also has a double 0. Even so, it's been enough to build places like Las Vegas into glittering metropolises dripping with wealth. In the long run, nobody wins, and computer simulations have proved it. Pick any number you like, spin the wheel 10,000 times and put a quid on the same number each spin. Whichever number you picked, trust me, you'll be showing a loss after that many goes. So gambling on such things has never interested me. The only caveat I'd add to the roulette scenario is that there have been cases of rigged and biased wheels in the past, but I've never come across one, so I'm happy to stick with my conclusion that it's a mug's game. The forms of gambling that do interest me are the ones where the odds are a matter of judgment and where there is an element of skill involved, not just luck. For me, that boils down to two main areas: poker and racing. In poker, the competition consists of real people, not a machine, and in horse racing, the odds are a matter of opinion set by bookies, punters, and supply and demand. They also fluctuate, which creates value opportunities. Or at least they did in the old pre-internet days. Things are much harder now. With superior knowledge or skill, it was possible in the past for a handful of professional punters to thrive. I know because I was one for a while. But I rarely bothered trying to explain the ins and outs of how I went about my business to the average Joe, as they only ever had one of two responses. The first was, Got any tips? And the second was blatant disbelief, usually accompanied by that old cliché, you never see a poor bookie. It was pointless wasting energy trying to persuade these people otherwise. That included Sally, but I was so desperate to hold on to her, believing I had finally found the girl to banish the ghost of Molly after so many failed romances, that I went to the meeting at her insistence. It was all to no avail because less than a week later, she dumped me for an estate agent from Godalming. Attending the meeting hit me in the pocket too, because it ran late by nearly an hour, which meant I was late getting to the betting shop. When I got there, I discovered I'd missed out on backing a 16-1 winner in the first at Chepstow, so I vowed never again. Going to GA, that was, not betting. This all happened almost a quarter of a century ago, but for some reason it still rankles with me. I'm not sure what I'm most annoyed about, losing the girl, not backing a big-priced winner I had carefully picked out that morning, or that I had wasted so much of my life on what was increasingly seeming like an utterly pointless hobby, which was probably the reason I had lost her and others in the first place. Had the life I had chosen blinded me to the things that really mattered? Getting married, having children, or some sort of proper career, for example? And as for racing and betting itself, I'm bored to the back teeth with it now, because the game is not what it was. I can see that right now as I sit in a local betting shop, looking around the soul-destroying surroundings that these places have become in recent years. When the fun stops, stop, they say on the TV adverts. This stopped being fun a long time ago, and that's nothing to do with winning or losing. Betting shops are unrecognizable from the places they were when I first started going into them in the early 1980s. Nowadays, they open before breakfast and stay open late into the evening, a cacophony of noise and colour assaulting the senses from all angles. Walls are plastered with dozens of screens flashing up odds, races and sports from all over the world. When there's no real sport, the customers, if there are any, are bombarded with cartoon arcade-style races going off every couple of minutes. Then there are the FOBTs, fixed odds betting terminals, those vampiric offspring of the old fruit machines, sucking every last penny out of the poor souls unfortunate enough to have become addicted to them. More than anything else, these machines and their online equivalents are responsible for the gambling epidemic that has swept the nation in recent years. And the big betting companies? They've positively encouraged it, whatever they might claim. They don't want horse racing punters, especially ones who might make a profit over the long term. Their ideal customer is someone who'll pump money into their slot machines and casino games where the profits are guaranteed. They want to keep those customers no matter what new guidelines are brought in to protect the vulnerable. It's the old-fashioned punters, the ones with enough knowledge and skill to pose a threat to the balance sheet, who were banned or restricted online or shown the door marked exit in the betting shop. I'm amazed there are still so many bookies on the high street, because most of the time, aside from one or two desperados hunched over the FOBTs, they're practically empty. They're relics, outdated windows into a world that no longer exists. And as I sit perched on a stool on New Year's Eve in one of these godforsaken places, I'm seriously considering whether to give up betting as my resolution for the year ahead. I had come in to put a bet on a horse called Big Ange, running in the last race at Uttoxeter. I still had one or two contacts in the racing industry, nowhere near as many as I once had, but this tip came from a very reliable source within a racing stable, whom I only heard from once or twice a year. I once did him a huge favour years ago, and he's never forgotten. I had to go into the shop because I can't get a bet online anymore. All my accounts are restricted. If I try to put 20 quid on a horse on my phone, the app will refuse it, telling me I can only have 20 pence on, or some similar paltry amount. When it comes to online accounts, the companies know every bet you've ever placed with them, and once your card is marked, that's it. In the shops, at least, you've got some chance of getting a bet on, just as you do at the racecourse, but I wasn't trekking all the way to Uttoxeter for one bet. It's not like I was lumping a large wedge on anyway. Those days are over. I managed to get my 20 quid on in the shop, which wasn't the one I normally use, but even so, they wouldn't let me take a price, only SP, the starting price, which is generally bad value. Other than a gaunt and dishevelled bloke feeding the FOB tea rather than himself, I was the only punter there, and when Big Ange won on her debut at odds of 7-2, the sullen middle-aged female cashier handed over my 90 quid with a scowl. As I made my way towards the door, I could see on one of the screens that the next cartoon race from the fictional track of Portman Park was about to go off. Even though I had won, I felt little joy at my success and just wanted to get out of the depressing place as quickly as possible. 40 years ago, betting shops were very different places. Slightly seedy, edgy, and full of characters who came in to bet and smoke all afternoon when the pubs were closed. They were full of atmosphere, and there were no screens, just a board marker chalking up the results and a tiny crackling speaker giving out the race commentaries in the corner. The humour, the banter, and the camaraderie made for an always enjoyable experience. From pensioners with their 10p each way accumulators to dodgy geezers lumping on odds-on favourites with ill-gotten gains from dubious enterprises, there was a real sense of being part of something, even if it was of an unsavoury nature. But that's all gone now, part of a world that exists now only in my memories. As I tucked my 420s and a tenner into my wallet and stepped outside, I was seriously debating whether Big Ange was going to be my last bet of all time. I was reasonably comfortable financially, owning my house outright. My private pension had kicked in when I turned 60 earlier in the year, and I had a fair bit tucked away from when times were good. I didn't need to do this anymore. What I didn't have is that special someone to share my life with. That was largely my fault. I no longer had any links to my roots on the border of Kentish Town and Camden Town, where I grew up in the 1970s. I moved out to Oxfordshire in the early 2000s after my mum and dad died. Ostensibly it was for a job, but really it was for a girl I met on holiday in Greece, whom I was sweet on at the time. That didn't work out either, but I had been here ever since, and to be honest, I quite liked it. There were plenty of worse places I could have ended up. Now I spend most of my spare time drinking in my local, the Red Lion, in this town where I settled all those years ago, and it's not a bad little boozer, even if some of the regulars get on my nerves. And that's where I was headed tonight, to see out 2023, because it's not like I had anything better to do. I went home, showered, and had a shave. For some years I had sported an immaculately trimmed beard, but I had shaved it off recently, an act that people said made me look younger, but I felt a little naked without it and was considering growing it back at some point. Next, I picked out a fresh shirt and tie. One thing I've always prided myself on is my appearance. It was something my father impressed upon me, and I've always made the effort, in stark contrast to most people around town, particularly in recent years. It's one thing to dress casually, but slovenly would be a more accurate description of late. I even saw a bloke in Sainsbury's in his dressing gown last week. With tonight being a special occasion, I had decided to wear a bow tie, even though the regulars in the pub would probably take the piss, especially Andy, the pub's resident alcoholic. Somehow I always end up lumbered with him. He is nothing like me at all and can at times be one of the most obnoxious individuals I've ever associated with. But I seem to spend more time with him than anyone else. Perhaps it's because he is there more than anyone else. Or maybe it's just my penance for a life badly lived. I microwaved a supermarket lasagna, another sad routine that brought home the loneliness of my existence, wolfed it down, and headed out for the evening. At least I had lined my stomach, which is more than can be said for Andy, who would doubtless have been on the liquid diet all day. I wondered at times how that man even stayed alive. I don't think I had ever seen him eat anything, not so much as a pork scratching. It was about 1/4 mile's walk in the cold from home to the pub on the town's main street, and I was gratified to see the logs piled up on the roaring fire as I opened the front door. I walked across the bare flagstones, worn smooth by the footsteps of generations of drinkers, to where Andy was perched on the same stool he always occupied. Clad inevitably in the dirty and faded denim jacket some swore he hadn't been seen without since the late 1980s. As I approached, I could see he was chatting up Lauren, the young barmaid who had been working here on and off over the past few months. Lauren was pretty and flirty with a short-cut black bob, and Andy was always trying it on with her, despite being at least 20 years her senior. The idea that she might be interested in the likes of him was laughable, but then as someone who had been no stranger to self-delusion when it came to women myself, I suppose I had no right to judge. "All I'm saying," said Andy, swaying slightly on his stool, "is that you shouldn't be seeing the new year in on your own." "I won't be, will I?" retorted Lauren. "I'm working here all evening. I'll be in a pub full of pissed noisy people when midnight rolls around." "I mean later, after the pub closes. I've got a bottle of champagne in the fridge at home I've been saving to share with the right person." "Yeah, it's been in there since 2003, said Richard Kent, the landlord, who had spotted me approaching and was already pulling me a pint of my preferred beer. "I've lost count of the number of women you've tried to entice back to your sorry abode with that line. Now, if you don't mind, I'd prefer it if you refrained from harassing my bar staff." "All I'm saying is I don't think a young woman like her should be walking home on her own," said Andy. "Who says I'm going home alone?" said Lauren. "My ex-boyfriend is over there by the pool table," she said, gesturing at 2 lads I vaguely recognized. I think the one she was referring to was called Josh. He was busy racking up the balls in a triangle for the next game. "Ex being the operative word," said Andy. "Take my advice, never look back. The best cure for getting over the last partner is the next one." "For goodness sake, give it a rest, Andy," I said, sidling up next to him at the bar. Was this really the best company I could find? "You're starting to sound seriously creepy. Leave the poor girl alone." "Nothing poor about me," said Lauren. "I can take care of myself." "Oh, look at you, all dressed up like a dog's dinner," said Andy, clocking my outfit. "Fancy your chances yourself, do you? Going to pull her with your girly bow tie?" "No, because I don't lust after women less than half my age like some old pervert." "He's just making an effort to look smart for the occasion," said Lauren, taking my side. "Unlike you, when did you last wash your hair?" "Oi, Ken, can you hear this?" protested Andy. "You want to have a word with your staff about how they talk to your loyal customers. She's casting aspersions on my personal hygiene." Kent handed me my pint, took the tenner from the bookies I was offering, then let out a deep sigh. "You know, I'm seriously thinking about trying to attract a better class of clientele to this place in the new year," he said. "That means reviewing who we do and don't allow in, if you get what I mean." "Dream on," said Andy, as a large gaggle of women dressed up to the nines burst through the front door. "It may be busy in here tonight with all these once-a-year drinkers, but who keeps this place going all year round, eh? People like me, that's who. You're not going to get rid of me, you can't afford to. Enough pubs are closing down as it is. You need my money, just like Craig did before you." "More accurately, the taxpayers' money," said Kent. Still claiming incapacity benefit, are we? How is the back these days? You seem to be able to get on and off that stool all right. You still talk like a copper, even years after they threw you out, replied Andy, in reference to Kent's previous occupation. Kent couldn't be bothered to answer, giving me my change before moving along the bar to serve the new arrivals as Andy turned his attention back to Lauren. As she had stated, she could more than take care of herself and always gave him short shrift. I would have found the whole exchange amusing if it weren't for the fact that I had heard variations of it so many times before that it was getting boring. She'd had enough too and turned her back to load the dishwasher, so that left me stuck with him as usual. "Nobby, can you get me a pint?" he asked, lifting his almost empty glass to his lips. "I'm a bit skint." "When aren't you?" I replied, but I would probably end up getting him one anyway, even though he didn't deserve it. Then I noticed he was looking past me at another woman who had just come into the pub. I turned to see that she was around my age, 60-ish, and someone I had never seen before. She didn't look dressed for a night out, in jeans and a red hoodie advertising a surf shack in a place called Pencarven, which I had vaguely heard of. It was somewhere in Cornwall, I think. Strangers wandered in and out all the time, but there was something about this one I found oddly alluring. Not in a sexual way, more a hypnotic one that gave me a strong sense that this woman was important to me in some way. It was irrational, and I couldn't remember feeling quite like this before. She had my complete attention, and as she took the short walk across the floor to the bar, I realized she was making a beeline straight for me. She couldn't avert her gaze from me any more than I could from her. Something extremely odd was going on here. The woman glanced at her left wrist, where I noticed her sleeve was rolled up, looked back at me and spoke. "Excuse me," she asked in her West Country accent. "Is your name Robin?" "Ha!" said Andy. "Robin? Him? You've got the wrong bloke." "Shut up, Andy," I replied, surprised at being called by my long-unused real name. "Yes, that's me." Andy seized on this right away, jumping in before she had a chance to reply. "Robin? What's this?" he persisted. "A blind date? An escort? Is that why you've given her a false name? Never tell a prostitute your real name. That's what a friend always says." The new arrival looked Andy up and down with all the contempt he deserved, given he had just more or less called her a hooker. "Is there anywhere we can go to talk privately?" she said, turning back to me. "There's a smoking area out back," I replied. "We could go there." "Good idea," said Andy. "I could do with a ciggy. I'll join you, and then you can introduce me to your new friend. Do you do a 2-for-1 offer?" "For fuck's sake, Andy," I said, realizing we weren't going to get a moment's peace with him hanging around. I had no idea who this mysterious new arrival was, but I was certain that whatever she had come to find me for had to be important. The last thing I needed was this irritating twat interfering. "We could go to your place," she suggested. "I knew it. She is an escort," said Andy. "Go on, son, fill your boots." "That's it. We're getting out of here," I said, furious at Andy and wishing Kent really would bar him, even though I knew he wouldn't. I would be having words later, but for now all that mattered was getting out of here and finding out what this woman wanted with me. "Can you get me that pint before you go?" asked Andy with a pathetic, pleading look in his eyes. "No," I replied firmly. "You don't deserve it." We escaped to the sanctity of the street, but I didn't want to go straight home, so I suggested we go for a quiet drink at the Carpenter's Arms. This was an old-fashioned Tudor-built pub just a couple of 100 yards up the road, frequented by an older, more sedate clientele. It didn't have Sky Sports or fruit machines, just open mic nights, folk groups, and other traditional entertainment. It tended to be busier in the day than at night, and I was pleased to see as we approached that it was as quiet as usual, even given the date. Other than a little small talk on the walk up the main street, I hadn't gleaned much about my mysterious visitor, beyond the fact that her name was Jenna and where she was from. She told me the sweatshirt was from a surf shack started by her husband and now run by her son in Pencarven, which she confirmed was a seaside village in North Cornwall. "It's not very busy in here, is it?" she remarked as we entered the old-fashioned building with its low ceilings and exposed wooden beams. There were about a dozen customers, most of whom were musicians, sitting around in a circle near a piano, holding various instruments. As we made our way to the bar, they began an impromptu jamming session, which was all unplugged, so it wasn't in any danger of drowning out our conversation. "Time was you could barely get in a pub on New Year's Eve," I said. "They were all ticket only and you had to pay. Now they're glad of anyone they can get, hence why Andy hasn't been barred from the Red Lion." "Yes, I'm sorry about dragging you away from your friend." "Friend is pushing it a bit. Acquaintance might be a more apt way to describe him. I think you're being most diplomatic considering what he said to you. Quite honestly, by dragging me away from him, you've done me a favour." "Not as big as the one I'm about to do you," she replied, making me more curious than ever. Andy no doubt would have seen innuendo in that remark, but I knew she was no escort. She had sought me out for some higher purpose, and as I ordered our drinks, I could not wait to get tucked away in a corner somewhere and find out what all this was about. "I've got a pub in Pencarven," said Jenna as we sat down. "I've lived there all my life. This is the first time I've ever been away from it at New Year." "That makes it all the more mysterious," I replied. "Why have you dragged yourself up here just to see me?" "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change your life for the better, just as it changed mine." "You had better hurry up and tell me then, because you're being a tad too cryptic for my liking. I think it's time we got to the point." "Okay," she replied. "But first, one more question. I want you to think back 40 years to 1984. What was going on in your life at that time?" This was getting ever more intriguing. Why would she want to know that? I cast my mind back to the life I was living back in London at the time. Some of the people I hung around with in those days made Andy look positively civilized. My gambling habit was well ingrained by then, as I thought about a life that revolved around pubs, bookies, and card schools. The latter were unregulated, taking place in back rooms and secret places where we played our illicit games, which were always referred to as spielers. The rest of the time I hung around at the fringes of the criminal underworld. Most of the time this was just a world of petty thieves, dodgy second-hand goods, and small-time conmen. It was sordid and sometimes risky, but despite that there was a strong sense of community and loyalty. The exception was the day my dad was convicted of armed robbery of a bank vault, in which 2 security guards had been held at gunpoint. Everyone knew he hadn't done it, but because they knew who did, they were too scared to speak out. I didn't tell Jenna all this because I didn't imagine she would be impressed, given that it hadn't been the most wholesome of lifestyles. It had been late 1983 when my father was convicted, and that was when my life began to spiral downhill. My mother was left in financial difficulties with the family business in jeopardy and the accompanying threat of eviction hanging over her. Not long after, I had lost Molly, who probably really had been the one. Sally and the others who came after her, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, could never hold a candle to her. I couldn't do anything about my father at the time, but the business which we eventually lost, and Molly, that was a different matter. "It wasn't a good time," I replied after a few seconds of awkward silence as I tried to figure out how best to sum all this up. "My father was in prison for a crime he did not commit. I lost the girl I loved, and my family fell on hard times. And if I hadn't been so wrapped up in my selfish pursuits, perhaps I could have done something about at least some of those things." "Everyone has things in their life they wish they had done differently," said Jenna. "But few get the chance to go back and fix them. Hardly any, in fact. just one chosen person per year. I was the last, and you are the next. I know that probably sounds mad, but it will all make sense in a moment. Hold out your arm." She was right, it did sound crazy, but I felt an overwhelming urge to comply and naturally held out my left arm alongside hers across the small round table, trying not to knock over my pint glass in the process. She still had the sleeve of her hoodie rolled up, so I did the same with my suit jacket. Then I finally found out what this was all about. An ornate golden bracelet materialized on her arm, fading in over a couple of seconds, rather like Doctor Who's TARDIS. It had a central glowing green jewel in the design, which looked powered, as if there were a battery concealed beneath. As soon as it was fully formed, it uncoiled from her wrist and slithered snake-like across to mine. All the while, I felt no fear. Intuitively, I knew that this was destined to happen. The bracelet wrapped itself around my wrist and sealed itself into place with a click. As it did, I felt a sense of warmth flowing through me and into my mind, like a soothing, comforting drug. It was relaxing me in a similar way to when I'd been given a sedative for a minor procedure in the local hospital. "There," she said. "How do you feel?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Different, and still a tad confused." "It takes a bit of getting used to," she said, "but you've still got a few hours until you go back." "Back to where? To the Red Lion?" "Hardly," she said with a smile. "Somewhere far better than that. You're going back to 1984. Under ordinary circumstances, if anyone had suggested such a thing, I would have scoffed at them. But as I watched the bracelet pulse green on my arm, I knew that what she claimed was true. This device, whatever it was, had got inside my head, making everything she said perfectly plausible. She went on to explain in detail how the bracelet worked, about how I was going back for a year, starting as Big Ben chimed in 1984, with the ability to reshape the timeline. She had done the same in 1983 and told me all about the things she achieved, setting my mind racing at the possibilities. I was particularly fascinated when she described how the bracelet would guide me, enabling me to do things I hadn't before. When she told the story of how she uncovered evidence to expose a corrupt counsellor, my thoughts immediately turned to my father and the way he had been framed. With the bracelet to help, perhaps he wouldn't have to rot in prison for the best part of a decade after all. When I put this to Jenna, she was most encouraging. However, my next suggestion did not go down so well. Given the nature of my lifelong hobby, it didn't take me long to realize one obvious potential benefit. I tell you what, this thing could be an absolute goldmine. I'm a racing fan. I've followed it for years. I can remember who won all the big races in 1984 for a start. With that knowledge, I can win millions. My excitement was to be short-lived. I could already sense from the disapproving look on her face as I excitedly delivered those lines that the proverbial piss was about to land on my chips. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid you can't. One of the rules of the bracelet is that you can't use it for personal financial gain. But that contradicts what you said earlier about 1983. You said that your life is way better now than before you went back in time." "Yes, but those were actions that benefited me more on a personal level, not blatant attempts at financial gain." "But you're better off financially," I protested. "You said you were living in a caravan in absolute poverty when the bracelet was first given to you, and now you've got your pub back." "Yes, I suppose so," she conceded. "But I didn't go out of my way to try and make money. My improved situation is a result of actions I took to help friends, family, and the whole community around me. Any improvement in my lot is just a side benefit." "Well, that's a little disheartening," I said. "But how are these rules enforced? I mean, if I want to put thousands on Secreto to win the derby, how's it going to stop me?" Oh, it'll find a way if you're just doing it out of greed, she said. Remember, it's all about your motivation. I do find it interesting that the bracelet should have chosen a gambler as its next recipient, though, because it must have known that would be the first thing you'd think about. So it mustn't be for personal gain, I ventured, mulling over the possibilities. There was all sorts of ducking and diving going on in Camden in the mid-1980s, and I'd seen plenty of good people lose their shirts in bent card schools, ripped off by con men, even welched on by an absconding bookie in one case. These small-time crooks were everywhere, in the pubs, the market, the betting shops. Could the bracelet help turn the tables on some of them? The more I thought about it, the more I began to see the possibilities. That's right, she replied. Better your life by all means, but not by selfish methods. Help others, right wrongs, and make the world around you a better place. The more you do for others, the more the bracelet will do for you. A thought struck me about my real name and the years of ribbing I'd taken because of it. I decided to run it by her. Jenna, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the name Robin? Be honest. Why, Robin Hood, of course. I bet you get sick of hearing it, don't you? I did when I was younger, but no one calls me Robin anymore. That's why Andy reacted how he did in the pub. Now, you do remember what Robin Hood was most famous for, don't you? Robbing the rich and giving to the poor? Exactly. Well, on my manor, which is what we used to call our little corner of London, plenty of people acquired their wealth at the expense of others. Maybe it's time that balance was redressed, don't you think? As I spoke, I glanced down at the bracelet. It was pulsing green with approval. Already I felt like I was on the right track, and Jenna seemed to think so too. Oh, I like that, she said. A modern-day Robin Hood in the cut and thrust of 1980s inner-city life. Yes, I think that could work very well. We talked for a while longer, as she gave me as much detail as she could about how the bracelet worked and what I could expect. Then at 9 o'clock she rang her husband to come and pick her up, explaining that they were staying up here for the night. I was left alone waiting for midnight, when the adventure would begin.